Welcome to Your Family's Health. This is Dr. Jeanine Cook-Gerard, and I'm here joined with Giovanni Petit-Frere, a nursing master's degree student. She's getting her master's degree in education, and we're from the nursing department here at Nassau Community College. Your Family's Health is a program that focuses on healthcare issues and resources available here in Nassau County. On the show, we will be speaking to experts from around the country to keep you up to date on current healthcare issues and trends. Today, we will be speaking to Marilyn McEntryre about Make a List. So if you want to know more about how to stay healthy in Nassau County, stay tuned for the next half hour to the Voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Welcome to the show, Marilyn.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So, just enjoying your book. Tell us a little bit about your book, Make a List.
Well, I've always been a list maker, as I discover many people have. It's surprising to me how many people who have read this say, oh, I've been making lists all my life. But I began at some point, because I also wrote poetry on and off, noticing that when you begin to make a list, something begins to happen that opens up the imagination, opens up intuitive space, opens up possibilities. And so lists began to be a way of reflection, a way of journaling, a way of celebrating moments with people. And as you fool around with the lines that you put down, some of them grow up to be poems, and some of them grow up to be prayers. But I have always understood writing to be healing work. I did my dissertation on autobiography as a healing art. And I think list making has that function too, that it really brings you back into touch with yourself in quite surprising ways.
So give us a little bit about yourself, your history and where you're coming from.
Yeah. I've always written, and I grew up in a family in which conversation was very important. It was a 3-generation family, and I feel, in retrospect, as though that was a huge gift to be in conversation with 2 generations of elders who all loved to tell stories and who had a wealth of life experience. And so I don't underestimate that legacy, and I really believe that conversation is what fertilizes the ground of imagination. I have always felt as though medicine was a road not taken, and there were medical people in my family. My mother practiced with a medical clinic in her time in India for some years, and so I sort of gravitated into medical humanities as an adult. So although I've spent most of my career in an English department, one of the courses I have loved teaching for the last 25 years is medical humanities, or medicine and literature, looking at cultural dimensions of medical practice. And at the heart of that is reflection on the role of language in medicine and self-care and how life-giving language is.
So where do you teach?
Well, these days I teach part-time at Berkeley. Over the past decade, I've moved from being a teacher who writes to being a writer who teaches. Mm-hmm. So I scaled back from full-time teaching back in 2009, and I teach in the medical UCSF, UC Berkeley joint medical program. And I've also, along the way, taught quite a number of workshops and retreats, and mostly focused on reflective writing of some kind.
So around what age would you say you discovered that writing a list or making a list is helpful, be it cathartic or be it a way to keep up with what you're doing during the day? Or yeah. When did you come to that?
I think possibly either when I was a young mother with 3 children I'd had in fairly quick succession, or maybe in graduate school, which I returned to a bit later. Mm-hmm. Life gets crowded, and sometimes when I didn't have time to sit and write at length, making a list would give me 5 minutes sometimes to just put something down and look at it. And I think lists serve as mirrors So I began to realize that this simple, short little form of putting something on paper and noticing what was coming out was a restorative practice and playful. I love the word play. I love the fact that the ways in which play connects with the life of the spirit. I think if you're alive, you play. So it really helped me in very busy times of my life and sometimes discouraging times to really just put things down and see what came up, because if you're watching and noticing as you put things down, something comes from the back of the mind or the subconscious or the old archives that you didn't expect. That almost always happens when you start making a list.
So when you make a list, do you already have in your mind what you want to write? Or as you say, is it something that you just doodle? You may start doodling and then start writing something and all have a place on this list, so-called list. Or is does it have to make sense?
It doesn't have to make sense, rational sense. But what does help me is to have a title. The title is the prompt. So on my 50th birthday, for instance, I wrote a list of what's fun after 50. And it was just a way of claiming the decade and the season of life that I was stepping into and claiming that shift into what I think of as elder space. But to think, yeah, what's fun? What isn't that much more fun for me? What's fun for me now? And what does it mean to have fun when you're in this season of life? Things came up that I wouldn't have expected. Or other titles are things like What the Beach Teaches. I live in California. I've spent a lot of time at the beach. And I do find the beach to be a life-giving place to go. And so think about, what have I learned by walking on the beach? What comes to me? What opens up? And it teaches me that I need a sense of spaciousness that's geographical, if I can get that, and that I can internalize that. Or another title is The Benefits of Bicycling, Or sometimes I write lists for people I love, like on birthdays. It's a lovely gift to just write a list of things I've noticed about you this year.
I like that.
Yeah.
So do you think that writing a list can change your life?
I do. I think sometimes when I speak of the element of surprise, I think sometimes what can happen is you begin to notice the currents in your own life that you haven't given words to. And you begin to notice, especially if you make a list like what I want now, you begin to notice what's fallen away and what's emerging, what's opening up. What do I not need to do anymore? What am I done with? Those kinds of things don't occur to you unless you ask yourself the question. And so making these little lists is a way of giving space to what might have been backgrounded because you're too busy to think about it.
So making these lists, do they help you communicate with others more effectively, or does it serve to sort of frame the conversation that you may have with someone in your life?
Well, I think it helps to make communication more effective because it helps you become more specific. And if there's any single thing I've put on students' papers more than any other for 20, 30 years, it's be more specific. What do you mean? What exactly do you mean? Make your verb more specific about process. But I think specificity is hard. It's really easy to retreat into generalities and abstractions. And specificity is always a gift, where you really put your finger on something. And if you get the right word for it, there is a kind of relief. There's a heart space that opens up when you say, yeah, that's it. That's what I need. That's what I meant. That's what I want. That's what I see. It's a pretty exciting little moment. It's like you can invite epiphany, and it comes.
And you share do you share the list? Is this something that's personal? Do you share it with, is this something that's like a diary, a journal that you close off and you keep it all your own? Or is it something that you don't mind sharing? Because I know it's a lot of is personal thoughts and introspection and maybe some private things. But do you share it with everyone? Is it something that
Yeah, I mostly share them. I mean, as I said, they're playful, and I don't always publish them. I have published some, and it's curious how often when I publish one of these, somebody says, "Oh, I like your poem." And I think, well, it wasn't a poem, it was a list, but they come pretty close to each other. So mostly I write them as a way of inviting people to play. And since this book has been published, I've spoken about it several times, and you almost can't talk about it without saying, let's all get out our pens and write some. And then people share the process. I just did this past weekend, and we gave 5 minutes. People could choose from a number of little titles and write lists. And then all I did was say, what happened while you were writing your list? And everybody I called on had a story about how something came up or they realized something. So it's fun as a shared practice. And I think when you do share a list with someone, like for instance, I have one I've given to people and almost every year on Mother's Day called Other Mothers. Because all of us have them, right? And especially women who don't have children end up being somebody's other mother. But that really opens up sometimes very vulnerable conversation about what it means to be a stepmother or a mother-in-law or not a mother or an auntie who's the confidant or all of those roles that women assume for each other. That's the kind of thing that can come up when you do a list.
Oh, how can list making become not only a useful habit, but a means of growth, even like a spiritual discipline?
Well, I've spoken already about the self-awareness that I think is almost inevitable if you really do this fairly regularly. And even if you're just doing it for fun, it's surprising how simple and how profound it can be. To just keep going, because the nature of a list is it can be short. You can say 5 things I like about my family, or 15 things I really want to change in this house, or 10 things or 12 things, whatever. You see that on magazine covers all the time. People feel as though life is manageable if you put a number to it. On the other hand, lists can go on and on and on. And one of the things a list says is there's more. And there's still more. And keep going, there's more. So that process of kind of excavation or opening up new layers of reflection or awareness can go on until it's time to stop. And that sense of when it's time to stop can come because you suddenly see what you needed in the process, or because it's time to get dinner,
So in looking back at the lists that you have written over the years, do you ever look back at the list and say that, or look introspectively and say, I see growth in myself because maybe 4 years ago I was saying this, and now today I have more of an understanding of who I am and how I deal with whatever it is that I'm dealing with from this list? Do you see growth?
I do, actually. I look at some of the very first lists I wrote, and they were fun, and I would still affirm most of what's on them. But if I were to make them now, they'd be a little bit different. And so I remember going to an autobiography and memoir workshop with Ira Progoff, who was one of Jung's disciples. And he asked us to make a list of 10 stepping stones, as he called them, in our lives, 10 kind of chapters in our life stories. He said, if you did this again next year, it would be a little different. And, time, the past keeps changing. And so in that way, I do think if you keep a record of lists, they become a record of shifting patterns of awareness, or what mattered to me then and what matters to me now. And the mattering map is a little fluid.
So how early in life do you think we should encourage even children to start this? Because it sounds to me like it not only is it introspective, but it's cathartic and very spiritual and fun, as you say. So how early should we begin or encouraging our young people to start making a list?
Well, part of me thinks as soon as they can pick up a pen.
Yeah.
But I remember one of my daughters, my oldest daughter, when she was, 3 or 4, spontaneously used to come in and say, "Mommy, I have 3 things to tell you," and she'd stick up her little fingers and say, "First." So there was